What's up, y'all? I'm back again on another video. And this video today, I'm gonna do a couple more, you know what I'm saying? But I'm gonna do this one and another one on this subject. You know, it's a disturbing incident that's really disturbing the black community. You know, first let me get a backdrop to the story, and then I'm gonna ask some stuff, you know what I'm saying, what we should be doing to prevent these things. You know what I'm saying? First off, we know what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where an Asian guy who owns the nail shops, a Korean guy for sure, you know what I'm saying, owns the nail shops, and he punched a sister in the face. They got into a little conversation, let me keep it real, and she just, you know, whatever, washed him off, and he whacked her in the face, you know what I'm saying, whoop-de-whoop. You know, so when he did that, busted her face in front of kids and all that stuff like that. So there was a boycott going on at this store, you know what I'm saying, and during this boycott at this store, you know, it was going pretty well. Then all of a sudden, they got together, got the right idea, said 50% off. And when they did 50% off, black women rushed to the goddamn store and started cussing out the people that was boycotting, the black people that was boycotting the store. So what are we going to do about this? You know what I'm saying? And that's what this video is about. And I'm going to show a situation that back in the past, what did we do for women or people, black people in general, that broke the code on stuff like this, on boycotts. You know, I'm going to give some sites and some explanation about what we had to do to traders like this. You know what I'm saying? Even during the video, if you watch the video, and I'm going to post it, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to try to post it with this video. One of the black and light-skinned women, she went there snapping, and you niggas ain't shit, and da-da-da-da. Like, damn, really? You know what I'm saying? No, B, you ain't shit. How the hell you going to do all this? So I'm going to bring up an incident that happened with black people, and what we had to do to combat that stuff. The counterinsurgency tactic we use to combat the black woman, not the black woman, you know what I'm saying? These people that was we call strike breakers. You know what I'm saying? Now, during this video, I want to make sure y'all don't put me in no box and no stuff like that. There's a lot of down black women, you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of down black men too, so you know what I'm saying? So I'm not trying to attack all black women, you know what I'm saying, and no shit like that. I'm attacking an incident where we as a community is not on code in this situation. You know what I'm saying? Which you all should agree on to be on code. The first thing I want to bring out is from the book, Deacons of Self-Defense. You know what I'm saying? Many people don't read this. Many people don't even know about these cats. You know what I'm saying? About the Deacons of Self-Defense. You know, and it's a shame because, you know, because of the PC history, we don't know what these cats did. But the Deacons of Self-Defense had the remedy for this shit. And I'm going to read excerpts from the book. And the book is a damn good book. I read it many times before. And that's how it popped in my head when I first seen it. Like, okay, we need to do something like this. You know, this is called the Port Gibson, it's happened in Mississippi. The Port Gibson, Mississippi incident. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to go in depth about what happened and what we need to do. This is an excerpt from the book, as I said before, by Hill, Deacons for Self-Defense and Justice. Page, I'm going to start off on page 26, at the bottom of page 326. All right, so if y'all need a reference, at the bottom of page 326 of the book is going to give you the reference. As head of the Port Gibson Deacons, Walker, who preoccupied with ensuring the black community complied with the boycott. You understand? Because you got to ensure the black community can comply with the boycott. Most blacks did, but a few were intractable. The NAACP on the sidebar tip, the NAACP at this time was ran by Charles Evers, the brother of Medgar Evers. Charles Evers is still alive. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if he's on Facebook or whatever, whoop-de-whoop, he's an old man now, but you know what I'm saying? You could talk to him, you know what I'm saying, and he'd probably let you know what's up too. So he's still alive. As head of the port, you know what I'm saying, the NAACP resorted to forceful tactics to begin to rein in boycott violators. At the regular Tuesday night NAACP meeting, Evers will read out loud a list of boycott violators and warn them that the spirit is going to get you. In most cases, the spirit assumed the form of a blick flying through a window. Boycott violator names were also published in mimeograph tabloid called The Black Times. So that's what you got to do. You got to put these people on blast, number one. Sister, you know, so-and-so, she broke the boycott. Brother so-and-so, he broke the boycott. You know what I'm saying? He's a traitor to the community. You know what I'm saying? You got to put these people on blast. Early in the boycott, Ever recruited a group of store watchers to enforce the boycott, many of whom eventually made it to Port Gibson Deacons chapter. The watchers frequently use strong arm tactics to enforce the boycott, because you got to use that. They routinely stop shoppers and intimidate them from not patronizing the store. If a shopper had already made their purchases, the watchers would seize and destroy the purchased items. So when they come out the store, snatch that shit and rip that shit up. You just wasted your money. Now what? One calling the police, we'll go ahead and call them. Fuck that. You know what I'm saying? Stand on some principle. The boycott breakers received intimidating, threatening calls, and on 2 occasions, stealing violent guns into their homes. And get your mind right. You know what I'm saying? The Deacons aided the watchers in enforcing the boycott, clearly crossing the line between defensive and offensive forces. Their action won an immunity of many, particularly the middle class blacks and the ministers, which you already know. The middle class blacks and the ministers. Most of your middle class people, black people, gonna roll with the whites anyway. It's unfortunate. And the ministers. The ministers in general, they were opposed, says Walkers. Some people hated us. Within a few months, the Deacons found themselves to blame for any acts of intimidation that occurred. Walker said the Deacons got labeled for harassing people because of their association with Everest, but he denied that the Deacons were intimidating people. We were just there to see that people were protected. The Claiborne County Sheriff Office thought otherwise. The Sheriff Office suspected that Port Gibson Deacons were involved in at least one shooting attack on a black boycott breaker. Right? One night, a car cruised by the home of Ed Gilmore and fired several shots into his house. Gilmore, a black mechanic, had been a high-profile boycott breaker. Within minutes, Sheriff deputies stopped Elmo Scott as he and 2 other Deacons was driving on Highway 61. Although the Sheriff's Office could never prove that the 3 Deacons were involved with the shooting, they did make a major find in Elmo's car that night. Scott was carrying the minutes to the Deacons meeting and a complete membership list of 42 members. So when they pulled him over, the police caught the list. You know what I'm saying? That's how you can't clearly keep shit down on paper. You got to keep it up in here. You know what I'm saying? The incident was a convincing argument for the secretaries with the secrecy practiced by most other Deacon groups. By keeping written records, which you shouldn't keep, the Port Gibson chapter exposes us as a potential retaliation by the police and racist forces. Indeed, Citizen Councils of America subsequently published all the names of the Deacons. So the white folks did it to us, and we done it to the traitors. So they then came back and done it to us. Then the Port Gibson chapter held regular meetings at several sites, including the First Baptist Church. Before the meeting, they would check the church for bombs and then post guards on the roofs on the adjacent building. The chapter charged dues to pay for their ammunition, and individual members paid for their own weapons and CB radios that was used to coordinate actions and monitor Klan activity. The chapter conducted both motor and foot patrols. They even organized regular target practice at the target range south of Port Gibson. We had our weapons everywhere we went, said Walker. But similar to the Jonesboro chapter, the Port Gibson Deacons did not publicly display their weapons, so they kept that stuff concealed. It wasn't walking like the Black Panthers with their guns. This chapter of the Deacons, this chapter, was not walking with their guns out and shit like that. They kept it concealed. When it's time for the action, you already know. In addition to patrolling, their duties include guarding marchers and keeping a watchful eye on picketers at the store. They would occasionally export their services to other towns, as in the case when they provided guard services in nearby Tillman. By staying in contact on CB radios in their cars and homes, the chapter in Port Gibson, Natchez, and Fayette comprise a regional defense network that can instantly be summoned in assistance or communicate alerts. The CB transmission was a source of fear as well as solace. Walker recalls a white man who spewed an independent tone of threats on the CB radio. He stayed on his walkie-talkie, and he always talked about how he was going to send them monkeys back to Africa. I'm going to send them to the moon before June. The whole situation was scary for me. The murders of civil rights workers in Neshoba County also hunted Walker in the Deacons. Didn't nobody tell him really know what was going to happen. The 3 fellas just got killed up there. They consistently stayed on our mind and always on our thoughts. The Klan went beyond mere insults and threats in Port Gibson. Alfred Lee Davis, a Deacon member, was once assaulted by an armed white man during the picket at the Jones Furniture Store. Deacons refused to back down in the face of a gun. And within minutes, George Walker and several other Deacons came to his aid. With his reinforcements at his side, Davis told one of the white men that he had the nerve to shoot him. Unfortunately, the local sheriff intervened and defused the situation. The Port Gibson boycott became a landmark legal case when white merchants sued the NAACP for conducting an illegal secondary boycott. And we're going to talk more about this. This is where we're going to span this stuff, and we're going to talk more about this. You know what I'm saying? Because they sued the NAACP for this, the white merchants. The merchants claimed that the NAACP had no valid complaint against their establishment, that the civil rights groups had targeted their business only to pressure the city and the county officials to accept their demands. After a prolonged court battle on August 9th, 1976, Hinds County Councilor George W. A. was awarded $1.2 million settlement to the white merchants. But it didn't end there. Walker says the chapter finally dissolved in 1968 in response to complaints that the Deacons were intimidating blacks in the community. The Port Gibson NAACP had summoned the Deacons to answer the charge they had thrown a brick at Alexander Collins' barbershop. The Deacons were incensed to have to defend themselves. We done put our lives on the line out here, and they think that low of us, then we just let what happens happens. The need for self-defense did not end with the demise of the Deacons. Only a year later, right, the NAACP, the Port Gibson NAACP kicked out the Deacons. So they said, okay, what's going to happen, what's going to happen? But only a year later, a shooting incident at a church led to a riot and a shootout between blacks and the highway patrol. So we're going to get more into this case as we talked about the Port Gibson, you know what I'm saying, landmark decision case. And we're going to see what happened in that, you know what I'm saying? But people got their mind right. Once they did that, people got their mind right. Once they started bopping people, you out of code, you out of bounds here, taking it, you brought from the store, taking their stuff and destroying it in front of their face and daring them to jump, you out of bounds here. You know what I'm saying? How you going to buy this shit? You know we got a boycott. We standing right here, you know we got a boycott going on. So we going to read a little bit more into that because this deserves to be talked about. And this will need to be done. All right, so the NAACP, as you said, August 9th, 1976, the white merchants of Port Gibson brought a case against, against them, which they were worth $1.2 million, right? So let's see what happened. The NAACP against the NAACP. The NAACP kept fighting the case. You know what I'm saying? And in 1982, right, the Supreme Court, the High Rule of the Land, ruled 8-0 that the National Association of Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, cannot be constitutionally held liable for the losses incurred by white merchants in a 7-year boycott. Remember, this boycott, many people don't know, because it's not talked about by the NAACP either, this boycott lasted 7 years. It's not going to happen overnight. But you got to check the people. Make sure they get their mind right. You know what I'm saying? You're not up to code. Incurring white merchants in a 7-year boycott of black residents of Claiborne County, Mississippi. On the last day of his 1981-82 term, the court handed a complete victory to the NAACP and 91 individual participants in the boycott. The decision was a significant reaffirmation of the constitutional right to conduct a boycott to seek political changes. So you can do what we're talking about, what we just talked about. The boycott were a widely used tool of civil rights organizations, and the liability shows that it shadow effect for nearly a decade. Conspiracy reversed the ruling. The High Court decision reversed a ruling by a Mississippi Supreme Court and a damage suit brought by 17 white merchants. The state court concluded that the boycott was a conspiracy carried out through illegal force, violence, and threats against the peace. It was imposed a joint liability on the association of 91 individuals for the white merchants' losses who will be determined by a separate proceeding. Today, Justice Paul Stevens, writing for the court, said the boycott sought to vindicate the rights of equality and freedom that lie at the heart of the Constitution guarantee for equal protection of the law. One of the foundations of our society, he said. It is the right of the individual to combine with other persons in pursuit of a common goal by lawful means. To the extent that the boycott was not violent. Justice Stevens said it was protected by the First Amendment guarantees of free speech, assembly, and political freedom of political association. The only proof that the merchants' losses had resulted from specific documented acts of violence, he said, could strip the participants in the boycott of their constitutional protection and make them liable. The lower court was ambiguous. But Justice Stevens said the Mississippi court ambiguous findings failed to either link specific individuals with acts of terror or to show that relatively few acts of violence had more than ephemeral consequences. The state court judgment, he said, is flatly inconsistent with the First Amendment, adding, a court must be wary of the claim that the true of the forest is better than revealed by the reptiles hidden in the woods than by the foliage of countless other firm-standing trees. The Claiborne chapter of the NAACP, Claiborne County chapter, organized a boycott in 1966 to put pressure on white leaders, many of whom own local business stores, to expand their economic and political opportunity for black residents. On boycott enforcers, Justice Stevens said the boycott included elements of criminality, but elements of majesty. Most of the reported violence was directed to boycott enforcers against black residents who patronized white business stores. Justice Stevens said the individual who actually engaged in violence may be held responsible for the injuries they caused, but he said that neither the merchants nor the state court had demonstrated that violence occurred in an entire collective effort. In the key passage of the 48-page opinion, he said, a massive and prolonged effort to change social and political and economic structures of the local environment cannot be characterized as a violent conspiracy simply in reference to the inferior consequences of a relative few violent acts. So you got a Supreme Court case backing you on this. The Mississippi Supreme Court had based the liability on a black national organization as opposed to that of 91 individual organizations solely on the finding that the NAACP field secretary, Charles Evers, had enforced a boycott with threats of violence and includes the promise to break the neck of any black resident who voided the boycott. So they knew about this. They knew what Charles Evers said. Justice Stevens reviewed the evidence on Mr. Evers' speeches in considerable detail, concluding that while he may have used a mostly charged rhetoric, he did not transcend the bounds of protected free speech. He added, an advocate must be free to stimulate his audience with spontaneous and emotional appeals for unity and an action in a common cause. As part of the findings in the coercion, the Mississippi court also cited that the boycotters, organizers, practice and reading out loud published names of those who patronize the store. Right? We talked about that in the book with Hill, right? That the boycott organizer will read people out loud who broke the code. This practice, Justice Stevens said, was constitutionally protected speech. Right? So you can do that. It's constitutionally protected speech. He put him on blast. Okay, let's put this guy on blast. Whack, 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 whack. Then he added, does not lose his protected character simply because it may embarrass others or coerce them into action. Injunction is ordered lifted. He ordered the Mississippi court to lift a permanent injunction and entered by the state court trial judge that barred the NAACP from conducting future boycotts. In 1973, a trial judge set the damage at $1.25 million, a figure that associates said at the time would ruin it financially. The state Supreme Court vacated the award and ordered a new trial on the amount of damages. The NAACP, the nation's largest civil rights group, has reserve of $1.65 billion. Just in case we lost this suit, said its chairman, Margaret Bush Wilson, said today, adding that the ruling will make a considerable defense to the association's financial status. At its national convention this week, the NAACP had intended to organize boycotts to counter what its general counsel, Thomas I. Atkins, called a resurgence of racism on the part of employees of business. The organization announced a boycott of movies and films and companies to the press for more jobs and more screen roles for blacks. Associate Justice Thurgood Marshall did not participate in the case. So he wasn't there. That's why it was an 8-0 vote. He had to recuse himself. Sorry about that, y'all. In the number 81-202, as former general counsel of the association, he recused himself of the case involving the organization. Associate Justice William Ringcast joined the court judgment, but without indicating any reason. He refused to sign Stevens' opinions. So that was the New York Times. Let me get the date for this one. I just read. That's from the New York Times archives, 1981. You know, so all the stuff I said you can do. You know what I'm saying? It's perfectly legal. Like that woman, that light-skinned girl, the woman that came up there and was talking all that shit. Get her name, put her on blast on Facebook. Look what she doing. Look how she disturbing the people. She don't have no love for her people. Look, she's selling weed. You know what I'm saying? In Tulsa, Oklahoma, whoever she is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that came out there snapping. Okay, we're gonna put you on blast. Here go another one from the New York Times. Decades after a boycott of white merchants by blacks had died down, the legal battle spawned and towards the civil Supreme Court decision that may help legal limits on political protests. The 3-year boycott, this one they say it's a 3-year boycott, the other one says it was a 7-year, so we say 3 to 7 years, was organized by the NAACP and the local black leaders in 1966. It protested the treatment of blacks by white merchants and an all-white government of Port Gibson and surrounding Claiborne County, in which merchants held support in offices. So these merchants, these white businesses, owners, held the offices of the political strings of Marlboro County, Mississippi. A lawsuit was brought by the merchants to stop the boycott and collect damages that have been slogging through the courts for 12 years. Meanwhile, control of the county government has passed from white hands to black hands. The Supreme Court agreed last month to hear the NAACP appeal of the December 1980 ruling of the Mississippi Supreme Court that the boycott was an illegal conspiracy. Use of violence was cited. Stressing the evidence some participants had used violence and threats to enforce the boycott, the state court held that the organization and 91 individual blacks financially liable for any and all damage that the white merchants had brought to the suit could prove were caused by the boycott. The defendants were also prohibited from engaging in boycott activities such as picketing in the future. The NAACP, seeking a Supreme Court review, argued that the decision violates the First Amendment of guarantee of freedom of association. It stated that the boycott campaigns have played an important role in the history of political protests in this country ever since the American colonists refused to pay English-made goods in order to force the repeal of the Stamp Act and the Townsend Act. The Supreme Court had never determined whether it has been a constitutional right to conduct organized commercial boycott as a weapon of political protest, or whether all participants in the protest can be held financially liable for violent actions of some. Thus, the Port Gibson case, which the court will probably decide sometime next year, is something of a legal cause of celebrity for civil rights groups. It is being watched by labor, business, and other groups because of the potential importance as a precedent that may be relevant to labor and the consumer boycott. Law firms donate work. It's inspiring our report to compensate or pro bono publicity and activity of some Washington religious firms, William Cutler and Pickering, which is handling this appeal in the Supreme Court, and Hogan and Hartson have donated thousands of hours of time and probably would have cost the corporate corporation hundreds of thousands of dollars. Representative Cunningham and Burlington said the firm planned to file a friend of the court brief on behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union and an organization of women. Now, see, everybody down, when it came down to black people, because you got the American Civil Liberties jumping in, the National Organization of Women, you know what I'm saying? But we was a test dummy for the shit, as usual. You know what I'm saying? So that's what it was. Meanwhile, the lawsuit become more and more revolt for the lives of people actually involved in it. Bouncing between state and federal courts, accumulating a 16,200-page record at the 18 months of the trial in 1973 and 1974, and threatening to end these people's financial ruin, it seems to take a life of its own. Damage rules excessive. The threat receded in December 1980 when the Mississippi Supreme Court ruled while the organization was liable to pay the damage of the $2.5 million occurred in 1976 by Chancellor Judge George W. Hayes as excessive. In his ruling, Hayes said that since the merchants had no say in the guaranteeing or the withholding the rights of the civil rights sought, the boycott was secondary and such illegal. But you just heard, written in the early part of this chat of this thing I'm reading, that the white merchants were in the political class. And politics and economics go hand in hand. The boycott grew out of history in which black citizens of Claiborne County have been foreclosed to participate in elections, forced to attend segregated schools, and denied employment either from public jobs funded by their own tax dollars or private jobs working for the merchants who depended on their trade. According to the papers filed by the NAACP in the Supreme Court, before the boycott, recalled 1967 Nathaniel H. Jones, one of its leaders, we never treated with courtesy in no time. Now the public schools have been open and legally desegregated. Blacks control the school board, and although almost all the whites in the county pulled their children out of the system and put them in private school, there are no longer white and black fountains in the courthouse. More black-owned businesses. Many white-owned stores have now employed black cashiers and clerks as boycotters demanded. There are more black-owned businesses on Main Street. One is Our Mark Inc., a black-owned store that Mr. Jones said he helped founded in 1967, so blacks will have something of their own. Because this was all about, even when we going back to the main story about this today, in 2018 with the Korean store shit, you know what I'm saying, and black women doing that. It's about having your own shit. People, we still don't fathom that. So he was easy to trick you for 50% off. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them bras be out there, no, not all black women. I'll make sure them, not all black women, but a lot of women like that be tricking, they nookie off. How much? $10. No, I ain't gonna say that. But you know what I'm saying? Real talk, they be tricking off. There's little social contact between blacks and white, according to Mr. Jones. Most of the churches are still segregated, and whites rarely go to black-owned stores. They don't go to that shit. But it's time to come a long way since April 1969, when people were riding around with guns in their cars and pickup after a white policeman shot and killed a black youth in his home. The Spurgeon boycott flared into a new period of militancy, and shots were fired at the First Baptist Church where blacks are meeting. William Ross, president of the county board of supervisors, who was one of the 91 black defendants in the suits, said blacks and whites have better relations in Claiborne County than there's ever been. He says he gets on fine with white merchants who are suing him. My highest paid man. George A. Hudson, the owner of Piggly Wiggly, I ain't been to Piggly Wiggly in a long time. Piggly Wiggly, Port Gibson's largest supermarket, is one of the merchants suing Ross and other boycotters. But in a separate interview, he almost had the same words as Mr. Ross did, and now stressing how long he gets well with the blacks. My highest paid man is a black man, Mr. Hudson said. What, you think he's going to trade with me for that if I don't treat him right? Frank Davis, 34, who was elected in 1979 as the county's first black sheriff since Reconstruction, says he had good ties with white store owners who had laid him off his job as a butcher after he attended a mass meeting of blacks the day the boycott started. Before the Port Gibson boycott started, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had been a stage of eventual takeover of the county political offices by blacks, who constituted 75% of the county population of its 12,000. But the civic government was white dominated. Now the most blatant symbols of white racism has faded, and the blacks have a measure of political power. A measure, keyword measure, of political power. Their common front of protests have given way for political rivalries and quarrels like those in the lively local governments everywhere else. Evans Doss, Jr., 32, walked in the boycott picket lines as a teenager and has been elected as county tax assessor and collector since 1971. Now, Mr. Ross is a vocal critic. He says Mr. Ross has tried too hard to please the white power structure by lowering taxes to please the local bankers and the Mississippi Power and Light Company. For example, rather than seeking higher revenues that might be used to help poor blacks, Ross who was a generation older, brushed aside the criticism with an air of weary tolerance. I try to be fair. We have always had our ways, but I try to be fair with all people, adding, if black members of the supervisory board are catering to any power structure, you didn't re-elected me so many times? We have our ways, he said, and I'm trying to be fair. Well, Edgar T. Chrysler, Jr., who writes and edits the weekly Port Gibson Reveille, as did his father and his grandfather, said, Mr. Ross is becoming a member of the establishment in this sense. They learned to work together, something you had to imagine 40 years ago. White bankers actively cooperating with black politicians. He recalled a recent Chamber of Commerce banquet when Mr. Ross and his wife and white leaders and their wives were eating cheek and jowl. At the same time, I saw in my own eyes, he saw a trace of lingering amazement. So, the whole thing was about bringing up the case, what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and showing what you need to do to counteract that. And how, when you do counteract that, the way I explained, you have the law on your side. Because you can bring up these cases right here. The poor doctor, you know what I'm saying, the NAACP versus Port Gibson. So you have the law on your side to defend yourself. But the main thing as a people is we need to get on the code. Because this stuff shouldn't be happening like that. That should be a no-brainer. You know what I'm saying? So the first thing you do, you get those women outside of them Tulsa, Oklahoma shop, the Korean shop, you get their names. You put their pictures on blast. You put it on Facebook. Such and such, such and such, such and such. She's a traitor to the community. She traded her race for some weave. She traded her race for some gel. You know what I'm saying? For a silk scarf. You know what I'm saying? This is how the stuff you do to get the stuff going on. And remember, this boycott lasted 3 to 7 years. And I also read it from the other thing, which is Deacons' self-defense book. Anyway, I'm going to do another video on this to go a little bit more further in value. I never really did a Deacons in self-defense thing because, you know what I'm saying, I really couldn't give them that much justice. You know what I'm saying? Even I read a couple books on them. And their predecessor. Can't forget about their predecessor, the Southern Sharecroppers Union. I did a video on them because many people don't know about them. But the Deacons in self-defense book is kind of big. But you know what I'm saying? So I really couldn't do too much on it. But I'm going to do another video backing this stuff up in hindsight. Anyway, much love to y'all. You know what I'm saying? Go over those tactics. Remember what I said. NAACP must support Gibson. You know what I'm saying? You can do that. You can do what I just stated. I'm giving y'all legal documentation. I cited 3 things. New York Times twice. You know what I'm saying? And the book of Lincoln's Self-Defense. And it's also in the book Charles Everest called Everest, I think. You know what I'm saying? Who's a pretty damn good, not well talked about NAACP chief. You know what I'm saying? For what it was worth. He told him, like they said, they even read his stuff in there. Like he told him. He said he can do that. They said it was legal for him to do what he was doing. Put these people on blast. Make sure they get their mind right. Hey, y'all have a wonderful day. More videos coming. Subscribe to the channel. Much love. You know what I'm saying? You know, much love to all y'all, man. You know what I'm saying? Subscribe to the channel. We got some more good stuff coming. Even got a sponsor. You know what I'm saying? So I'm pushing it, keeping on doing it. Hey, Black August.